All right, so when I was pushing Mr. Heath before, right, Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
if I'm drawing a free body diagram, how would I describe the forces acting on Mr. Heath?
Well, I would include the applied force that was you pushing him. And then
Very good, you've been studying.
I would include the force of gravity that's going downward.
Stellar, son.
And the normal force is going in the opposite direction.
How do we know this is the normal force? What's the definition of a normal force? We're on camera, man.
Somebody say that knows it's something my voice.
Dang on Shane. I'm not saying that on here. You insulted my classroom.
No.
Evan Peterson.
No, I know. I'm not normal force is the force that the object has going against gravity.
Normal force is the force the object has going against gravity. Talk to us. This is precious time. Nobody's gonna, once they hear gaps in the YouTube, they just stop listening. I gotta keep their attention. You got books in front of you.
Normal force is it's equal in magnitude in opposite direction. Must be acting on.
Is that the definition of normal force?
Yes.
A force that acts on the surface in a direction perpendicular to the surface.
One more time, Mr. Carson.
A force that acts on a surface in direction perpendicular to the surface.
Perpendicular to the surface. Here we assume, because we were pushing Mr. Heath, that the surface is right here. And the normal force is acting perpendicular to that surface. Got that? So that means that the surface looks like this. Then the normal force would be in what direction? Perpendicular to the surface. Normal force. Right? Now, we started discussing friction. And this is good. This is our preview for our lab on Thursday. Right? We started discussing friction. And we started discussing coefficient of friction. Coefficient of friction is simply discussing the variable, how much different surfaces affect the level of friction that's involved. Two surfaces that interface, depending on the depending on what kind of surface they are, changes the amount of friction on the surface. Most of us know that. For example, if you wouldn't, you may, for example, most of us, we have enough money to not have to buy burlap sacks to clothe ourselves, right? Partly, not necessarily just because of the friction, partly because they're not terribly comfortable, all right? Now, if you were someone who lived in a rural area, for example, and you spend a lot of time driving on those gravel roads, those ones that got big rocks in them, you just have to replace your tires quite frequently. Why?
Because it wears away the rubber.
It wears away the rubber. But what wears away the rubber?
The friction between
those huge rocks. That's why they pave the roads in developed countries, in developed cities. Yeah. They pave the roads. It allows the tires to last longer and makes for a more comfortable ride. What is the formula that we have for our coefficient of kinetic friction?
Applied force minus F(k).
That is the net force. Net force equals the difference in applied force in F of K. Mr. Peterson's just ahead of us, that's all. So net force equals the applied force minus the force of friction. The difference in the applied force and the force of friction, we know that. That's what we discussed when we were pushing Mr. Heath. But here, what is the formula for coefficient of kinetic friction? Yes, sir.
Mu K equals Fk over Fw.
Fk over F what?
W.
Read that again? Oh, you're looking at your notes.
Oh, N.
That's N.
My bad. My handwriting is.
So this coefficient, this frictional force over my normal force. The coefficient of kinetic friction. And each material we have a table in our book. What page is that? That has a table in it that talks about different coefficients of kinetic friction? 138. Now, you have seen, when you're driving, if you've ever seen those barriers that are right next to the highway, those concrete barriers, right? You've seen the metal barriers too, right?
Yeah.
The ones that are metal. And usually when you see the concrete ones on the highway, they look something like this. They got a broad base. Because we found out, if you look on page, is it 138 again? What is the coefficient of kinetic friction? What is the coefficient of friction for steel on steel? Say it again. 0.57. What is the coefficient of kinetic friction with steel on concrete? All right. What about rubber on concrete?
Dry or wet?
Rubber on concrete is what?
0.8.
0.8.
And that's dry concrete.
Dry concrete? Okay. 0.8. We'll just assume dry concrete. 0.8. That means that the coefficient of friction, there's more friction involved here. Right? Now, if you were trying to slow down, do you want more or less friction?
Less.
So, if I'm trying to slow down, I want to make sure that the surfaces that have the most amount of friction are interfacing with each other. Like if you're swinging, for example, you're swinging, somebody's pushing you, ready to stop. You start dragging your feet on the ground. You don't start trying to stop by grabbing air, right? You try to drag the foot on the ground to slow yourself down, right? If below you, sometimes if you're at a park that's been dealt with for a long time, they have those deep pits underneath the swings because people have been digging with their feet for a long time. So you start, for some of us, we start either reaching down for the dirt, but we won't reach out for the grass because the grass doesn't have as much friction. We try to reach down for the gravel dirt. Yes?
Yes.
Here, these new barriers have been built even though they also have the concrete barriers next to them. Is there something you observe here that's a bit different here? What describe this object here? What talk to me?
Well, I think it might be bigger at the bottom.
Bigger at the bottom. Why would it be bigger at the bottom?
Because the cars get in an accident, it'll like friction, it'll slow the cars down.
Friction of what? What's interacting at this part?
The base in the ground.
What's interacting at this level on the car?
The tires.
The tires. The
Slow the
tires.
cars down. So
Slow the cars down. Because what they find out is that these barriers here are made of steel, and the car is made of some kind of metal, aluminum maybe. And the coefficient of friction is a lot lower here than it is between the rubber and concrete. And so I'm interested in slowing down. And so this slows the tires down without necessarily banging up your car. You still get your car banged up, but it slows it down a lot quicker. Follow? Make sense?
Yes.
So this part is rubbing up against your tires to slow you down. Here, you slide for a long time. Now, oftentimes, if you've ever seen these before, usually when you see these, if it's been involved in any kind of accident, it's all messed up. It's all bent up. Cars, it shows a streak of the car all the way around it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Here, usually these stay sustained. Follow? That's all I'm interested in. We are solid for the day. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Let me get a round of applause.